eerie morning or magical midnight, wherever, whenever you may be, across the dimensions or around the vibrations. I'm Tilly Treadwell, and oh, have I got a show for you. Won't you join us on The Weird Walk Home? Everyone, today I have with me the one, the only Joshua Cutchin. How are you, sir?
I'm doing wonderfully well, and it's nice to be talking to someone who can elevate my spirits on a dreary December morning. So
Oh,
thank you.
well, thank you. That's a high title. I will certainly try my best.
All right.
So, for people who may not know exactly who you are, could you please tell us who you are, where you come from, what you're doing today, and what you're doing tomorrow?
I was born in North Carolina. I grew up in a household that didn't really discourage the discussion of paranormal topics. I jumped right into some paranormal books, typically cryptozoology at an early age, but my parents had the attitude of, hey, he's reading, so who cares, as long as he's reading.
Oh,
Um, and it's an interest that I've had for a long time. And then in 2015, um, I started noticing some things that I thought were interesting that should be talked about in the UFO field, and I sort of sat with it for a little bit, and I was like, maybe I should be the one to write this, which is, as I'm sure you're aware, it's a decision to get involved in this stuff. It's a big decision because there are certain people in your day-to-day life who will look at you very differently after you come out with being interested in this sort of thing and actually thinking that there's something real behind a lot of paranormal phenomena. But I was lucky enough to have a very supportive wife and to be in a place in life where I could attach my name to that. And I do this because I think all this stuff is really neat, quite frankly, and I think it's interesting. But it has evolved into something of a career in that regard. So I completely realize how blessed I am to be able to pursue this full time like I do today. So uh, I am I used to introduce myself as a musician author, and now it's author musician because I'm doing so much more writing, and a more significant part of my income comes from writing than it does playing music. But a not insignificant chunk does come from continuing to be involved in music. I taught private lessons and master classes at local schools for several years until my twin boys were born. And at that point, I decided that it made more sense to be around the house more to help out. So right now, I just write and play and rinse and repeat. Um, so I released my last nonfiction book in 2022. That's the two-parter Ecology of Souls and the
yes.
Mythology of Death and the Paranormal. So
Mhm.
my goal for 2024 is to do a good deal more field work and get out from behind the computer screen a little bit more often. So I will still come back here. Don't worry about that.
Okay,
But
cool. I
but
was going to ask him, like,
yeah.
oh, this is the first, last, and only time I'm gonna see you.
No, 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 no. And I'm thinking about maybe structuring it as like a sabbatical in the back of my head. Um, maybe the latter half of 2024, once the leaves start falling off all the trees and you can see things through the forest. Um, Using a period of about 6 months, the back half of the year, and being like, okay, I'm just going to concentrate on getting out there. And you know, you have all these opportunities, and there's so many things in life that you talk to people, and you're like, we should do that someday, and you never end up doing it,
Never do
because
it.
you have to be conscientious and intentional about making the time for it. So that's,
Indeed.
I think, going to be what the back half of 2024 looks like to me, if I have my way, is just being more intentional about things like that.
Good for you. I
Sorry,
like
that was a
that.
super long intro. Sorry about that.
No, that's fine. I love that. And when people talk to me like this, I think that it gives myself and the audience a lot more insight into the way that the gears turn in someone's mind. And for
Mhm.
me, that's really important. So I like that and I appreciate it and I totally support you.
Well, thank you.
However, if you ever want to come back here, just let me know. We can talk about whatever you want.
Oh, it'll happen. Really, probably what it will look like is me just limiting myself to how many podcasts I do.
um, I wanted to ask you over the course of your paranormal career, have you ever had, well, earlier, did you have a lot of paranormal experiences, or did you put everything together just by your own intelligence? Because your writing, without knowing you, it parallels almost exactly everything that I've experienced since I was an infant.
That's fascinating. Yeah, it's kind of funny. I feel like I've had less strange things happen to me since I started writing about it, than before I started writing about it.
Usually it's
With
the opposite.
I know, right? I know. Like,
Yeah.
I'm sort of like, is there some sort of personal defect in me or something?
Aw.
But no, I mean, like, so I grew up, the sort of environment that I grew up in. I was always, I was interested in ghosts, but it wasn't a paradigm shifting question for me or my family even. It's like, of course, ghosts are probably a thing. um I did grow up in a Christian household, and I know that there are some segments of Christianity that are very much opposed to the idea of something like ghosts, but for us it was never really a question, that you could have some sort of visitation from beyond the grave. So um I had a handful of experiences in my younger days. One of the first things that I can remember was this isn't really a ghost thing. It's kind of a poltergeist or a fairy thing, depending on the way you look at it. But my folks were adding on to their house that I was growing up in, and during the time of the construction, my mother and I would always find a stack of four quarters in the unlikeliest places. The example that I always use is, I don't know if you've ever had one of these giant dictionaries that's like 6 inches across, and like
I know what
really
you're talking
big,
about.
big,
Old
huge, thick, yeah,
school.
old school dictionaries.
Hmm.
And there was one of those, and we got out and down the dictionary. My mother, pulled it down for some reason, and behind the dictionary there was a stack of four quarters, and there would be a stack of four quarters like on top of the fridge and in a cabinet, and it was just the strangest thing because my mother remembers this, and I remember this, and I don't think it. I mean, it wasn't a part of the house that the team working on the addition didn't have access to. It was just odd. Um, I saw, um, and probably I guess this must have been about 2004. Um, I was on a tour of a home that was used, like many of them were, as a hospital during the Civil War, and I saw amongst a crowd of people what I believe, what I suspect was a boy soldier, who looked directly at me. I remember him, and I thought it was just, a reenactor or a cosplayer. Um, but nobody else on my tour group, remembered seeing the boy, nor did any of my family, nor did any of the people who were actually ticketing the site. And you had to go through them to to get access, so it was
Yeah,
kind of
yeah.
odd. So odd, and I did have I was dating a girl at one point who was into ghost hunting, and we went to Waverly Hills in Louisville. And on that particular occasion, I mean, that was, if I have to like put a moment, or if I have to sort of narrow down and say this was the point in time when I couldn't get the toothpaste back in the tube, it would
Yeah.
be that trip to Waverly, because uh, to summarize what happened, we would be coming around the corner. If you know anything about Waverly, it's sort of shaped like a big broad U, or like, imagine like a U, and you just sort of stretch it, and it's
Okay, okay.
wide. And as we would come around each of the corners on one of the floors, it would look just like, I don't know if you remember the way that TV sets used to throw off this blue glow, the flicker. You would be looking, if you're not looking at the screen, you're looking at somebody who was watching the screen, they would be covered in this blue flickering glow.
Oh,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
It
yeah.
looked exactly like that right before we would come around the corners, to the extent that I was like, who's got a TV on? And every time we turn the
Yeah.
corner, there would be nothing. So there was that, but there was also, I wasn't taking I wasn't taking my visit to Waverly very seriously, and I had a door to the stairwell that was completely shut. Big heavy metal door, go from completely shut to being slammed open so hard that it hit the wall behind it over the course of, like, a fraction of a second. Like somebody
Oh,
had kicked it from the other side, like completely
yeah.
shut to bam, in hitting the wall behind it. So that's a moment when you're like, you know, maybe the owners had hooked up a hydraulic pump or something, but I don't think so. I mean,
I
that place is in such was at the time at least in such shambles. And it's like, okay, well, this appears to be, enough for me to be proof that there's something that, we don't acknowledge and that we don't quite understand at a cultural level. Um, and then after that, it's been kind of things that have been suggestive of the paranormal. Most of my journey to sort of uh, believing in these things has been a sort of Goldilocksing of my way towards them. Like, in terms of I sort of read enough and looked at enough that I kind of convinced myself that yeah, there's something odd going on here. Um, and as I continue to go on, I've tended to see that I think that a lot of these things they straddle the line between fiction and reality. And I don't mean that in a way that says that it's all hoax, but like I don't have a problem with like fakes and hoaxes as much as I used to. Like if you used to say something like, there was a let's take Slender Man, right? I don't I know
oh
Slender
yeah,
Man is I know Slender Man is an invention of the internet. And at one point it would be like, oh, well, it came from the internet, so it couldn't be real. So people who see Slender Man are full of it. But then you read things like, the Philip experiment, and you hear about tulpas and you hear about
yeah,
egregores,
yeah,
and you compare that as well to the fact that if you look at psi phenomena, it originates in your head in a lot of cases, but is able to influence consensus reality.
yes,
Similarly, ghosts don't seem to have any substance, but they can open doors and slam doors in my case, and even vocalize and materialize and leave footprints in talcum powder. That was one of the early tools of
mhm,
parapsychologists. So it seems to suggest that our understanding of what's real and what is, not real is sort of mistaken. And I see that in the UFO thing and quite frankly in the Bigfoot thing as well. It seems to, we are physical beings with a component that is psychic. And I suspect that a lot of these phenomena are psychic beings with a component that is or can be physical.
nailed.
It's sort of where I've kind of come up with in the course of my journey after looking at a lot of this stuff. So again, nice long rambling answer for you. Yeah.
Aw. So I agree with almost everything that you said. I do personally have a problem with purposeful hoaxes. I think that morally it's wrong. But when it comes to things like creepy pasta, where the Slender Man supposedly
Mhm.
originated, I really do believe that there is at least one element of truth within each of those stories.
Mhm.
Because every time I've looked at them, I've been able to find apparently real life mirroring beings,
Mhm.
people's phenomena. So that's where I stand on that.
Right. Well, I guess I should clarify my stance on hoaxes. Like, I would never hoax, nor would I encourage anyone to hoax. And I do agree that there's sort of a moral imperative to not do that sort of thing. I guess what I was drawing at more was this idea that um, I do think that hoaxes can, under certain circumstances, actually draw in legitimate phenomenon as well. Um,
I
or,
agree.
or, or that sometimes legitimate phenomenon, if you're asked time and again to repeat it, people end up hoaxing. Classic example that, I know Soraya uses often is Uri Geller, psychic who claimed to be able to bend spoons, but when he was under the pressure to do it on demand on television, he resorted to what appears to be, fakery to do it. So
Really? So,
yeah, yeah, there was some sort of softer material that he used to bend spoons on demand. But you see this in a lot of poltergeist cases where it seems like there's legitimate phenomenon, and then it attracts the attention of the media, and then these poor children are asked to repeat these things that have happened to them, and they sort of like they get frustrated and they end up faking it.
uh,
The Fox sisters, I think, are probably something similar to that as well, from what I've read. And that's sort of where I've landed with a lot of the UFO contactees as well. I think a lot of them had something genuinely strange that happened to them, but they couldn't quite nest it into their worldview. And you get the attention of people, and it's like, well, people are asking me for proof. I've got to, I know it's true, but how do I show to them that it's true? And then you end up with people sort of hoaxing. So that would be my caveat. I do agree that, I have some, I have some really, like, I would love to see. There's an idea that I've had for an experiment, and I'm not going to do it because it would be, reputation ending. But
Oh
the
boy.
idea of just inventing a cryptid for an area and like seeding the community with these fake stories of a cryptid that is seen in some spot that you've chosen, and seeing if you end up getting reports from people
You
who actually have seen
clever,
something.
clever
Even though,
guy.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, it's kind of a Philip experiment kind of idea where you come up with this fictional character, but somehow the phenomenon responds by like latching onto that and presenting it. But I wouldn't. Someone else wants to do that. Be my guest. I can't do it. I would love to do it. Maybe if I had a different disposition, I would bring myself to do it.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Yeah.
but it'll
Don't do
be
it if it's hard.
right, right. But it would be really interesting to see. And you know what? I'm going to make this statement. I'm going to leave it where it is. I'm not sure that that hasn't already happened to a degree in recent years, and that's where I'll let people try to figure out what I mean by
Oh
that.
boy. Well, I do hope that you'll be kind enough to let me in on it
Yeah.
after the show,
I
but
mean,
if not, I'll
not
understand.
again, not with me. I have not done that, but I think
Oh,
some other people have done that. So yeah, this is what you kind of find when you look into, like, I don't know if you're familiar with George Hansen's work, the trickster and the
no.
paranormal, but I think that there's a certain level of um showmanship, and that's what I think, people like Uri Geller sort of embody, um, where um we were talking about deception and all these sort of things, and um, I think that it's almost like the pH in the water. Certain organisms won't thrive unless the pH of the water is a certain way. And I think there has to be this sort of like, I often think there has to be this sort of manipulative, um, ulterior agenda going on amongst a lot of different characters in the paranormal in order for the paranormal to thrive. And I realize it's a weird thing to say, but it's like I think that these phenomena have to retain a degree of plausible deniability um for the for the population at large, in order to actually exist. Because uh that's why I'm always so skeptical on the idea of proving any of this stuff, because I think the moment that you prove it, it's not going to happen anymore. So the idea that um certain individuals uh would sort of use their platforms for political causes. I mean, I don't like it, but
Yeah.
it's consistent with that perspective of the phenomenon, where it's always kind of um sort of pushing people away as well.
I could see that. I could see that. I don't know. I'll hold my tongue. But I agree with what you're saying as far as a philosophy goes. Um, even myself, I try to kind of break that mold a little bit because
Mhm.
I present, obviously, I have a certain look, I have a certain backdrop and everything, but I try to keep my essence as honest and consistent as I can
Mhm.
without risking my life. And so for
Right.
me, that's where I draw the line, because ultimately, at the end of the day, I'm not concerned with drawing in people or energy. I'm just here to try to put out my essence and my best and maybe help people connect some dots
Right.
without risking my life, because there are some
Well,
violent people.
yeah, well, you're doing it for yourself, and I think that's where a lot of the problems in this community come in, is when it does turn into a job. And I realize the irony of me saying that, because it's become a job for me. When it does turn into a job, you get all sorts of like other investments and other considerations involved. For me, like the way that I try to stay centered in regards to all this, is like it's turned into a job for me, just so I can justify how much time I want to spend on it, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So it's
Yeah,
not
but
about,
it's not
yeah.
emotionally a job for you.
Right, right, exactly, exactly. So I view it sort of as like justification for me spending all this time reading about it and talking about it and being interested in it, because it's you know it's facilitating that sort of lifestyle for me. It's not about becoming the most famous this or the most famous that. Like I could not care about that. I would like to see some of my ideas sort of take hold a little bit more here and there, but that's because I just think that they're, again, it's about the purity of the subject matter. Like I think that they're neat ideas, and I think that they're interesting ideas, and I think that they're helpful ideas, but it's not about like self-aggrandizing. But again, it's that sort of disreputability that we talked about. Like there are people, this field does attract people who self-aggrandize and who are trying to land a TV show, you know.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah,
that's true.
with matching windbreakers,
Oh, Jesus,
Yeah.
members only.
Yep, yep, yep.
You remember those.
Oh yeah.
I agree. And I watched you, excuse me, I've watched you for years, my friend, and I honestly have been waiting for this interview for at least the last 3 years.
Oh shucks. Thank you. That's
And
kind.
yes, absolutely. And it's because when I've listened to you and I've read your work, I recognize that, at least from my point of view, it seems as though you are highly intelligent, you're highly accurate. And most of this, it seems like other types of peoples are not telling you this information, from my understanding. You're piecing these things together with very little ego. And I find that precious.
Well, I appreciate it. Again, it just comes back to the subject matter for me. And I
Exactly.
would, I there have been a couple of things where I've gone back in my books and been like, that wasn't entirely accurate. It wasn't a willful manipulation or anything. I just got something wrong. Um,
Mm,
and maybe someday I'll go back and I'll do some corrections and whatnot. But I always am trying to come from an earnest place. I mean that's why I was in 2019 I was on Ancient Aliens, and I did like 3 hours worth of an interview, and they used about 18 seconds of me. I think they're just like one segment of me in there, and I'm kind of proud of it because
uh,
they coach you so hard for a lot of these shows. The independent documentaries not so much, but like the recurring television shows, that they have a certain direction that they want you to go in. Might you'll get a kick out of this. And who knows, I might not get invited back on Ancient Aliens, but that's fine by me at
Jeez,
this point.
do you want me to
Um,
edit this part out?
no, 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 no. This is
Okay.
I'm just being honest. Like I'm just being honest about what happened. It was on, a Trojan Feast thing with the food and drink stuff, and there was a question that was like, the cornucopia or horn of plenty is seen in a lot of American folk art, showing an abundance of food and fruit coming out of, this horn. Could this be ancient alien replicator technology? I'm like,
Interesting.
no. And and eventually, like the most that like I tried to be as accommodating as I could, but I wouldn't be like, yeah, I think that this is like, an ancient alien replicator. No, it's like a folkloric thing. So I said there are many examples in folklore and mythology of food being dispensed from a divine source. Like that's why I left it. But it's just yeah.
Mhm.
Um, Sorry, I feel like I've been kind of ranting about honesty and dishonesty here for a while, but I do think that there are, as much as this field does attract people who sort of want to further themselves. There are a lot of really good people who are, again, just doing it for the love of the subject matter, and a lot of them, honestly, you'll never hear about because they are doing it
Yeah.
for the love of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've been told by other Ancient Aliens guests that you've got to be a smooth talker, a real smooth talker.
Yeah, and I don't think I'm that.
Yeah, yeah.
I
You
don't think
you
I'm that.
strike me as a little bit more down to earth
I
and
think it's probably a little bit more from the hip, so to speak.
yeah,
Yeah, than what they're looking for, and that's fine. And I've had other opportunities to be on shows, and it's become clear that the subject matter doesn't quite align with what I want to talk about. I'm like, I can't just be on a show for the sake of being on a show.
yeah,
Um, and
yeah,
yeah, yeah. So
gotcha. So I when I asked you the question about experiencing anything before, what I'm trying to get at, I just want to clarify, you've not had intimate interactions with non-human people who told you anything, have you?
No, no, this is just me going through books and applying sort of a comparative um analysis of different things. And the closest thing that I've had to that will be moments where I am in a library and I'll be like, "Oh, this looks interesting," and I'll pick up a book, and it'll kind of like unlock everything that I was looking for, and maybe even becomes the primary thesis of a book. And it's sometimes it's in a place that I would have never thought to have looked.
Hmm.
But so there's sort of that library angel quality sometimes. But as far as like an actual being or a presence or intelligence coming to me with some stuff, no. I mean, this is all just good old fashioned research and going through books and such. Yeah.
Gotcha, gotcha. That for me has been a burning question for many years now because with everything that you put out in your books, I have agreed with, I would say, 98 to 99% of it. And it has come from my own experiences with non human people. But again, I might be crazy, so don't listen to me, probably. There's my disclaimer.
Well, I think that maybe it just comes from the fact that and sort of the crowd that you have plugged into with Soraya would be part of this as well. Just try to listen to experiencers, and uh, and sort of you don't have to believe everything that everybody says, but you do kind of have to reconcile it, if that makes any sense. So, I do have a problem when people come to me and they get really specific with like constructing this Star Wars style reality where they're like, the Sebnarblian Federation
Yeah,
met with the Chadwazians, and and like they get really specific with like names and titles and characters and stuff, and I'm like,
yeah.
okay, what? I don't know what to do with the specificity of that information, but you can still pull out from that a lot of themes and ideas that do seem to have some sort of um,
Mhm.
grounding in objectivity if you sort of dial out your perspective enough.
Yeah,
Um, but there are
yeah.
a lot of people who sort of get into their own sort of pet theory of things and discard a lot of things that conflict with them. And look, I'm sure I'm guilty of it too, right? I'm not saying that I'm innocent in this regard, but at the same time, you have to at least find a way to understand how these outliers to your own worldview could have arisen in the first place. I mean, there are a lot of different reasons why I wrote Ecology of Souls, but one of them was the fact that I just got really uncomfortable, not from like an ideological perspective or a religious perspective, but just in terms of an I don't know what to do with it perspective. I was really uncomfortable with stories of past lives and reincarnation and pre-birth memories in the alien abduction scenario or in the UFO contact scenario. All those ideas I'm fine with on some sort of metaphysical idea, but how does that interface with the UFO thing? And that's so
Mhm.
instead of like running away from it, I tried to run towards it, and be like, okay, you know, in that sort of Terence McKenna way, if it's real, if it's true, it can handle the pressure.
I
Um,
like that.
so that's what a lot of that, or at least a part of that project was just trying to be like, these stories aren't going away. These people seem to be authentic in what they have come to understand.
Mhm.
How do you
Mhm.
integrate that in a way um, that still fits or is works with some of the other stuff that you've been talking about?
Mhm. Yeah, I agree. It can be, I think, for most people, a little hard to swallow. What I've come to perhaps understand at maximum, at least objectively, I think, and what I've experienced is that human people, fairy people, shadow people, aliens, whatever you want to call them, any types of hybrids, we're all family. And we all blend together in time, in genetics, in vibration. And it seems to me that the only real separation is between, you could say, like density or vibration, and then the ability to perceive. And the human brain filters out a lot, in my understanding.
Right.
So I think that death ties into all of this because it's not really you dying, it's you're becoming of a lighter vibration. You're
Yeah,
rejoining.
yeah, it's a return. Yeah,
Yeah.
and I think if you pay attention, as you obviously have, to a lot of these stories, they do all sort of point to this monist idea that everything is of a single piece, like we are of single pieces with everything around us. And honestly, I think a lot of the journey of human beings in accepting one another has been a journey towards that as well, realizing that we are all fundamentally the same, and that we all have the same needs and wants and desires, and that we all, pretty much want the same thing if we could strip away all the stuff that ego brings into the equation. Um,
Hmm.
but it's another problem that, even though I am a Christian, I've always had a problem with this idea that everything is good or bad, this binary idea. I'm not sure if your experience with the Catholic Church was sort of running into that as well, but like, it's just like it's one or the other, it's good or bad. I'm like, can't we view this a little bit more as, ecology of souls, as an ecology of beings that serve certain needs and such.
Hmm.
And probably a spectrum of a lot of stuff in between that has its own agendas and have their but and sometimes they align with ours and sometimes they don't. And even then it isn't always malevolent. I'm not saying that there aren't malevolent things out there. There certainly are. But just to understand that there's probably a diversity um of this other world that we tend to neglect when we get bogged down in that sort of dichotomy that uh a lot of Western religions especially tend to talk about.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Um, I don't really see so-called good and evil, to be honest with you. I see just needs, desires, and
Hmm.
goals for myself.
Hmm.
And so when I was younger and I was recruited into kind of it was a semi-covert, I call it like exorcism light team for the Catholic Church. So
A secret school of exorcists. I love this. I love this.
it was in a way. This was right after I had quit a 4-year program where I was training to be part of like an intense trauma healing team. And so I had 2 years of professional mental health training under my belt. So when I quit, I was completely disheartened, excuse me, by the program because my superiors had explained to me that I was too loving and I was too soft because most of these people, I know it sucked. It broke my heart. They told me that they just pulled me aside one day after one of the clients had basically, I believe, thrown a chair at me, if I'm remembering that properly. It was a hard day. And they just said, look, we know that you really love these people. You really want to help, but we've been at this. One of them was there for like 10 years or something, and one was there for longer. And they were like, if one in every, say, 1,000 actually makes any meaningful change after the trauma that they've been through, then that is what we consider success. But you can't believe them when they say that they are going to come to these classes, they're going to get sober, they're going to stop lying and stealing, and et cetera, because they have been so traumatized that they now see it's themselves versus everyone else, and they have that victim mentality that they can't break out of.
Hmm.
Most That absolutely broke my heart. And so a few months later I did wind up quitting, and I was 2 years into a 4-year program. Everything was paid. I didn't have to pay anything back, and then they would also pay for materials and everything like that. It was a really good deal, but I just couldn't hack it. I really couldn't. So I quit. I moved out of state, and I wound up meeting this guy who was a young Catholic guy, and he would just come into my job and we would talk casually almost every day. And then the one day he asked me, so what do you do outside of this? And at this point, I was already doing some independent tarot card reading and, some independent healing services and whatnot, energy work. He wound up saying, well, would you like to come and do some investigations with me and a group of my friends? The way he pitched it to me was completely different, though, than the reality. I realized, later on down the road. And I said, yeah, that sounds awesome. Sign me up. So he wound up taking me to the local Catholic church, and I sat down with the father of the church, and he was asking me a bunch of questions and whatnot. And I was like, geez, I didn't realize that this was like an interview, but I guess I passed. I said yes. And it was interesting because that's how I got into doing the exorcism, so-called light stuff. I wound up not doing any type of exorcism work in the religious way.
Mm-hmm.
I was there to be the intuitive co-lead, basically. So the guy who had asked me to join, he handled all of the equipment, all of the interaction with the church from there on out, all of the reporting and stuff. I was there to explain what I was seeing, what I was feeling, and then they would try to document proof of that where they could. And then because of the mental health training I had, I was there to help suss out who's probably faking, who's telling the truth, who needs to see a psychiatrist, probably, that kind of stuff.
Right.
So, most cases that I wound up working with them, a lot of people have called me a traitor to humanity, and I don't see it that
Oh,
way. Yeah,
geez. That's some strong language.
it
But,
is, and
yeah.
you may understand why. Um, so in most of these cases, I would go in, I developed a formula. I would go in and I would not talk to the family for a while about anything paranormal. It was just me trying to get to know each person individually and see if I could pick up any green flags, red flags, or other. And then I would go and investigate the house by myself. So I would just say, oh yeah, excuse me. I would like to go do a walk around to see if I can pick up anything. A lot of the times, these non-human people would approach me and they would tell me things like, we're not the bad guys here. You don't understand what's going on here. Let me show you. And so they would then show me what's going on with the human family, which would then be verified. Not once did any of these non-human people lie to me, but in every single negative case, which was almost every single case I've ever worked, the
Mm-hmm.
human people were lying. And that's something that's been really hard for me to get my head around, just how much human people lie.
Mm.
And so this has been a serious sticking point between the non-human people and a lot of human people. And this is why a lot of them, they have no qualms about attacking or using human people because they see them as dirty and lying and destructive and evil. So I think it's very fascinating. And I've been called a traitor to humanity because I actually most of the time side with the non-human people, objectively speaking. So
Mm-hmm.
all of that to say, thank you for coming to my own talk. I love your feedback.
No, I think that's really interesting because I can't provide any specific examples, but that idea of the beings from the other world, which is sort of a big generic way to describe it.
Yeah,
The idea of them not being able to not being able to lie,
exactly.
is really seems really consistent to me. I mean, I think about the fact that you know, if you look at fairy folklore, they don't lie, but they are very literal and contractually deceptive. It's like or in magical practice, it's the ham sandwich fallacy, as I call it. If you get a spirit and you say, make me a ham sandwich, like they turn you into a ham sandwich. Like, you know what I mean?
Yes,
It's not what you meant. It's not wrong, but but like, so it's that idea of wordplay and being careful with wording and, but at the root of it, there is a certain authenticity and a certain honesty to it.
yeah.
Um, and then the other thing that puts me in the mindset of was a quote that I've never forgotten that Soraya got out of Laird Scranton when he was talking about some of the Dogon beliefs of the Dogon
Mm,
people from Africa,
mhm.
where the in the Dogon cosmology, the spirit world has perfect knowledge, but an inability to act. And the physical world has imperfect knowledge, but the ability to act. So the idea that we would be manipulated by unseen forces because we can actually act on things is also really consistent with me as well, or for
Mm.
me as well. That's really interesting. I still think traitor to humanity is a little bit is a
It's a
little
little
bit strong,
strong.
a little bit strong. It's a little bit strong. Um,
Yeah.
um,
I thought so too, but I spent a lot of years thinking that I was the bad guy, you know? But
yeah,
once I got into the integration therapy that I explained to you, I realized that I just think opposite of most human people, and my psychology naturally falls more in line with
right.
non-human people. And I think that that just puts me in an interesting position. Maybe if people want to talk with me, maybe they could learn something a little different, and maybe we can all come together in a different way. I don't know.
No, I would definitely agree with that. That and the fact that there's such an emphasis on, fixing things in this world. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't strive to fix things in this world, but I think uh this world is always going to be broken, you know. And to realize that the wholeness that we seek in this existence is probably unattainable, but is possibly attainable when you look at that sort of monist perspective of reality, the idea that everything is one. It is obtainable at higher vibrations or higher levels of consciousness, or however you want to phrase it. I think that that's a really helpful way to look at things. So, you do everything that you can here to make things better for yourself,
Correct.
for everyone else.
Correct.
But you also have to sort of realize that it is going to be imperfect. And I think that a lot of people don't really want to hear that. Um, you know,
Yeah.
um, I mean, it reminds me of or the possibility that the brokenness in our existence here in this waking reality might serve a greater purpose. This is something that the Eastern traditions have really incorporated very well, and I think that some of the Western ones have integrated this idea as well to a certain degree, but the way that they're presented at the sort of pop culture level is not about that. We a lot of Christians treat God as a vending machine. You put a prayer in and you get what you want out,
Yeah.
without really realizing that if you actually study the texts of a lot of these different traditions, from Judaism to Islam to Christianity, you'll see that there is a full acknowledgement that suffering is a part of the human condition. And
Yeah.
um, I don't want to say that it's a purifying thing, or that or anything like that, but it's a teaching thing, and it also puts things in perspective. I mean, I look back across my own life, and I mean, I think I'm kind of old, but I'm not an old man yet, right? And there've been so many moments that were just the most horrific,
Yeah.
tragic, traumatic things to have gone through. But the wisdom that they have provided me with similar situations down the road is absolutely invaluable.
Oh, yeah.
To have that perspective is something that we need, but we lack, because there is this culture of instant gratification, and we try to distance ourselves from pain so often, so much. We don't really sit with pain and suffering and difficulty um,
Mhm.
as well as we should, or as well as we used to, I think.
I agree. Um, Goodness, there were so many great points that you made. Where do I even start? Oh boy. Uh, I completely agree with everything that you said, with the caveat that only if a person desires that type of awareness and whatnot.
Well, yeah,
So,
you can't
uh,
help people who don't want to help themselves. Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah.
But is it really help? I don't know necessarily that all of this is help, because I know that some of the stuff that I have to say has seemingly harmed other people. And
Mhm.
so now I live a life where I play to everyone else's ideas, desires, and needs where possible without sacrificing my core honesty. But I reserve that for, like, unless they ask me for it or we're having a one-on-one intimate talk about philosophy, I keep my trap shut. And
Yeah.
I just,
Wise. Yeah.
yeah, and I just try to encourage them to choose their own path, live their own adventure,
Mhm.
whether that's something I agree with or not, and whether it's going to kill them or not. At the end of the day, I just see it as that their soul is learning something.
That's true, and it always strikes me how many of these anxieties do tend to relieve themselves once you integrate reincarnation as a possibility into your
Yeah.
worldview. I mean, and the research on it is really quite good. I mean,
Mm,
won't I won't die on the hill, so to speak, of Bigfoot or UFOs or fairies or anything like that. But once you get into
yeah.
stuff like psi phenomena and reincarnation and the near death stuff, I mean, it's some of the best research that's out there. The psi stuff has got some really great results in the laboratory. Obviously, near death experiences and reincarnation, you can't put into a laboratory, right? That's not the setting ethically you can do that within, at
No,
least.
no, no, no.
But the work of Ian Stevenson and Jim Tucker, University of Virginia, I mean, some of the stuff that they had done on reincarnation is so compelling that it suggests that there's something to those stories. Now, there's a lot of ways around it, like maybe these children who come back with these past life memories aren't literally the one-to-one reincarnation of someone else. Maybe they're accessing the Akashic record or something along those lines.
Yeah.
That's possible as well. But it does imply that there is a store of existence, a store of knowledge. And once you again, once you realize that there's something bigger than that, then it kind of it allows you to sit with the possibility that people are even some self-destructive journeys are journeys of discovery that the person needs to have, or the person's soul more accurately, or
Hmm.
less essence or life essence or whatever it needs to experience. And I know that that's kind of a painful thing to hear. But
Hmm.
I've it's been really interesting. I checked myself into rehabilitation for alcoholism in 2020. And
Oh,
no, but it's also like, again, one of those things that's horrible to go through, but like you wouldn't trade for the world. I mean, I can't tell you how many
yeah.
people I've met who have had these rock bottoms, and they're like, but it was the best thing to happen to me. It was the best thing and the
Exactly.
worst thing to happen to me. And the level of introspection and spirituality and perspective that you find in that community. I mean, if there ever is the opportunity to experience that. And it's not exactly like, well, I mean, yeah, you can just go to an AA meeting, I guess, and sit through it if you want to, even if you don't have a substance abuse problem. Although, in my
It's not
experience,
the same experience.
no, it's not the same experience. And in my experience, AA meetings are kind of drab affairs. Like they can be like you can walk out of those being like, oh man, I need a drink. But I guess what I'm saying is, like, if you ever do have the opportunity to with the permission of the organization, participate in a recovery group of some sort, just to see the level of perspective and self-reconciliation and self-awareness that is encouraged in those spaces is really a valuable thing that I think everybody could benefit from. Really, really, definitely so.
It is. Yeah, I was going to be a group facilitator once upon a time, because that was part of the clinical training program that I was doing. And in watching the professionals work with people, you're right. The amount of responsibility and the gentle attitude that they had, and all of the patience, it was transformative to witness.
Well,
Yeah.
it also, there's this dualism of responsibility that's emphasized that I feel like we don't get a lot outside of that context. What I mean by that is,
Yeah.
you know, to a person, Um, and I'm sure there are examples where this isn't the case, but I would say broadly to a person, the people who deal with substance abuse have some sort of trauma. Um, so it's not their fault, but
Uh-huh.
there is also a level of personal responsibility that they have control over, right?
Amen.
And there's a level of self-love that they have control over. So it really is this dualism of responsibility that I don't think you get outside of that context where it's always like, oh, this was so and so's fault, or oh, this is my own
Yeah.
fault. You know,
Yeah.
there really is sort of a shared responsibility, again, sort of decoupled from the judgment that we usually see. That it was just a really inspiring thing to see, and it was recalibrating in a big way. Yeah.
I'm very happy for you. I hope that you're well and healthy and healed
So
these
far,
days.
so good. So
Are
far, so good. It was about, it's been just a little bit over 3 years, so doing well.
good. That's excellent. I'm proud of you, really.
Yeah, thank you. It was really wild. It was the other thing that I found really interesting about it was just, I mean, I Carl Jung and Joseph Campbell got me through that period. And what I mean by that is like I just journaled the entire time while I was at my facility. So much that I became known as the guy who keeps the journal. Like that was sort of my
Nice.
reputation while I was there. And but like I really fell back on those archetypal ideas and sort of tried to apply them to my own life. And once you do, I think a lot of people can do this where you see like if I think a lot of value can be granted by placing the hero's journey, that the heroine's journey, um,
Yes.
onto your own life. And
Yes.
if you recognize the fact that yes, you are in the belly of the whale,
Mhm.
yes, you are in the second act when everything seems lost, you also realize that like that story also wants to complete itself. You know, that story also wants to be a redemptive story. You've hit all these archetypal beats of the descent, but there are also these archetypal beats that the universe, God, what have you, wants you to also satisfy as well. So you will find it's once you are able to see and recognize those moments,
Mhm.
I think it can be a really powerful tool. And there's probably a book about that exact idea somewhere out there. If not, I'd love to write it at some point. But yeah, I mean, the idea that you can sort of nest these things onto one another, and just these death and rebirth narratives are really important to that as well.
True.
You know,
True.
the idea that you have to go through something horrible to experience any sort of positive, lasting change, I think is something of a truism. And interestingly enough, like as I enacted my own death and rebirth narrative in that period, that's when I experienced the most synchronicities. It was like a wild synchronicity every single day. And I was and
If
it
if I if
yeah.
I may, before I forget, I'm so sorry to interrupt, my dear, but I wanted to say that what you're talking about with this storyline and the
Hmm.
story arc, it both lines up with my view of incarnations of a soul as being a
Hmm.
story in itself
Hmm.
and a type of tulpa.
Hmm.
So you may want to watch my episode Imaginary if you haven't already.
Okay, I have not, so I'll definitely check that out. I mean,
Cool.
it brings us full circle to kind of what we were talking about in the beginning with,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. And then on top of that, you're talking about the hero's journey.
Hmm.
This reminds me of what I've come to believe about free will and also what non human people have told me about free will, and that most human people do not have free will. So most see themselves apparently as victims, and they have no greater purpose or realization or imagination. And then this traps them in that victim narrative even further. And so I think that what you're talking about, even though you hit that rock bottom, it seems to me that it actually helped you to develop even more free will, even more awareness and agency. And I think that that's beautiful, however you came across it. What do
Well,
you think?
I appreciate it. You know, in I try not to dwell on things like whether or not we have free will too often because it makes my head hurt, and
Oh,
I find that
okay.
no, it's totally fine that you brought it up. I mean, I guess for me, like um, my own perspective on the topic of free will is that there isn't that we do have free will, but there are certain ruts, certain trackways that are easier for us to travel, if that makes any sense. And it's a matter of not listening and pushing against those trackways, and that's usually in my experience when you get into trouble. um, so I would refer to something like these archetypal ideas, like the hero or heroine's journey, as as one of those trackways. And you know, you may be surrendering a bit of free will, but those stories have happy endings. Like, if I could come to a lot of people, if I came to you and said, "Hey, guess what? You don't get free will, but everything works out in the end." Like a lot of people would take that, a lot of people would take that offer. And I just I it's similar to, I think, choosing an occupation. If you can find that alignment of something that you like and something that you exhibit an above average ability at doing, then that's really what you should do. Like, and
Yeah,
it
yeah.
might not be what you had in mind as a kid, but it also is, if it also is that path of least resistance in a way. Um, because um, you're not imposing, you're not stifling, rather, I guess you should say, you're not stifling your passions for something that is, just work, and um, you're not suffering financially because you're just following your passions. It really is that equilibrium and that balance. And again, that's not to say that you can't go through periods of time when you're doing one more than the other. Like we've all had jobs that we would rather not be doing, but we're there because, we do need the money. But like if you can find that equilibrium, that's one of those paths of least resistance that I think is probably um it's kind of that free will track that I kind of tend
Um,
to view things through, if that makes sense, or that no free will track, I guess. But yeah. So it's I always sort of view life as like a pathway that you can sort of take detours off of. But and sometimes your detour is really big, like mine was. But then again, who's to say that it was a detour? Maybe it was just a
that's
really
literally
rocky portion
the
yeah,
thing.
a rocky portion of the pathway. Yeah. Yeah.
Hmm.
But
For
see,
sure.
here's what I love about the paranormal and the supernatural, call it what you will, is that if you're doing it right, these are the kinds of conversations that you're having. You know what I mean? Like it's the
Yeah.
conversations about reality and life and existence. And as someone who hasn't had a lot of firsthand experience with this stuff, I've tended to view this entire journey as being one of sort of alchemical self-improvement, and re-enchantment, really. I mean, uh, I don't know if I don't know if Bigfoot is in my local park or not, but the possibility makes the park more interesting, and which in turn makes me more appreciative and more mindful of where I am. And I think any way you slice it, that's a good thing.
I agree with you. Sometimes, to be honest, I get a little jealous of people who haven't had a ton of experiences because there's more mystery. But because I've been so close to this my whole life, I seem to understand a lot more. And um, my life is pretty enchanted. So even just the other day, I was having an interview with Mike Clelland, the owl
Hmm.
guy. Yeah, and I had an experience that was caught on camera.
Hmm.
And it's just I have all of these experiences, and some people, I don't know, some people get upset with me because I say this freely. I consider myself to be friends with the jinn and with fairies and
Hmm.
all these other types of people. And so I wonder what it would be like to live a lifetime where I don't have all of that, so that it's more mysterious. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I do. I guess I would like to ask you a question. So do you get like intensely frustrated when you read stuff or read opinions that are wildly off base about the nature of these things? Do you get really do you get hopping mad about that?
Oh, well, are you asking me personally, or are you asking me objectively? Because I see
Um,
those different things.
oh well. I mean,
Or
I
do you
guess
want both
I mean,
answers?
I guess you have to sort of extend the benefit of the doubt to someone who hasn't had these experiences that's trying to figure it out. But I'm just, I guess personally, like you'd be like, no,
Personally,
no, dudette, like this is not, this is not the way that it is. You've got it all backwards. Like, do you get frustrated in that sense?
um, sometimes, but only when I'm seeing a human person try to villainize or demonize these non-human
Right.
people.
Right.
So for me, I have worked with so-called demons,
Mhm.
and so-called like the baddest of the bad, but they've I like them so much better than I like most human people, to be honest with you. I wish I was kidding. I know how
Yeah.
that sounds, but I just talk to them like they are people, and they talk with me as an individual, and we both have either the same or very similar moral understandings, philosophical understandings. I've never had any problems. And this gets into maybe I could tell you a story to help you understand. So this was one of the cases that almost made me just completely quit everything and walk away. Um, I was called into a staunch Catholic family's home with my team. It was me and four other people, and the family was made up of the mother, the father, and the teenage son. So they were reporting no physical attacks, but lots and lots of stuff happening in the home that was apparently very negative, and just typical poltergeist type things and shadow figure and stuff like that. I get there, and uh it seemed all very normal at first with the human family. The mom, I always just call them Karen and Bob. Those are not their real names though. The mom had baked cookies and she set them out, and I sat down and was munching a cookie with them, and Bob, the husband, was there, and he seemed all good and fine. And the teenage boy, he was required to be there, but he wasn't really saying anything. He just kind of sat there on his phone for the most part. But as I explained before, I don't talk anything paranormal for typically at least it would be a few hours into getting to know these people, because I don't see a paranormal investigation as that I'm there looking for the demon or the ghost or whatever. I'm there to do a holistic investigation, in my opinion. So this is how I would conduct it. I spent some time there, and then I felt called to go and check out the rest of the house and see if there was seemingly anyone there and what I could garner from them. And so I excused myself, went and walked around, and I bumped into the non-human person. I was like, hey, I'm not here to cause any problems. I'm not here to fight. I'm not here to judge you. I'm just here to figure out what's going on and how we can harmonize so that everyone can be happy. And essentially this non-human person, so-called demon, told me that it was absolutely nothing personal. He I say it felt like a very masculine person to me, but I guess sex and gender can work very differently elsewhere. That's another story for another day, perhaps. But he essentially told me that he was attracted in by the lifestyle that these human people were living. So he told me it's nothing personal. I am here because they are on the vibration where they're putting out tons and tons of food for me free of charge. So why shouldn't I take advantage? They invited me here. And I asked him to expand on that. And case after case after case, it came back the same exact way: living an unhealthy lifestyle, being an abusive, nasty person, being dishonest about things, tons of drinking and drugs. It attracts certain types of non-human people in to feed off of that, and sometimes they'll amp things up in the environment to get more of that energetic response. So food from the human people. So this guy wound up telling me that he's not leaving unless they change their lifestyles. even if it wasn't anything personal. So I asked, well, what can they do if they actually genuinely want you to leave? So this guy, my dude, broke down everything for me right then and there. He's like, Karen is a day drinking alcoholic who likes to go out driving drunk, like very frequently. Um, and apparently the husband didn't know this about her. And then the husband, he absolutely hated his life. He hated his job. He hated his marriage. He was unhappy with things in the Catholic Church. He hated being a father and a husband the way it was being done because he didn't have as much freedom and independence as he, really wanted to have. And the poor teenage son, of course, he's just there watching all of this go on around him, and that puts out trauma too. So um, me in my youthful ignorance, I went back and I just put it out on the table. I was like, okay, I've talked to this non-human person. I refused to call them a demon even back then because they treated me just fine. We had no communication issues. It turned out though, everything that this non-human person told me was true. I said, hey, this is what's going on. This non-human person said, Karen, you've got to stop the day drinking and the reckless driving and all of that. And Karen lost her mind over what I had to say, and I didn't realize that I had done anything emotionally wrong by saying it in front of the whole family and my team. So yeah, she lost her mind as I was trying to explain what I had been told, and I explained what I was told about Bob. And the meanwhile, Karen is starting to shriek like a banshee, and she's calling me a liar and whatnot. And Bob is just like hanging his head over the table in utter shame. And the kid gets up and he goes over to a corner in the kitchen and he's just like huddling there, scared, because his mom's freaking out. She picked up a crucifix, and this was a really hard day for me. So I can't remember if she picked it up from the counter or if she had snatched it off the wall, but she wound up throwing it at me and calling me a demon and making fun of the way that I physically look and saying that I was, a traitor to humanity and stuff like that. And so it wound up that the kid in the corner just he peeped up just a little bit. He's like, Mom, it's all true. And so
Yeah.
um on the way out, um the non-human person approached me at the doorway and just said, this is exactly what I'm talking about. I'm not the problem here. They are. And then I made sure that I'd never have to see that family again. They were dropped from any care or help with this team and just referred out to family counseling and whatnot, if I'm remembering properly, but I don't know anything else beyond that. But yeah, the family had been lying about their
Mhm.
actual issue, church and everything. So there was a lot of stuff that we didn't even know about going in. And every single human case that was negative that I worked has had something exactly like that, even though it's not been quite as severe. And so this is why I say I've wound up siding with the non-human people, even the so-called demons and the so-called parasites, because they're just there as a reflection of humanity on display, if that makes sense.
No, it does. You know, I'm definitely of the opinion that at least most of the time, quote unquote demons can do nothing without human hands, you know? It's the
That's what they
and
told
it's
me.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And it's almost like the truly demonic is the way that we interface with these things, rather than the fact that they objectively exist. And the entire time you were describing that, the thing that kept on running through my head was, something like a shark. Like, if you jump in the water and you're, gutting fish into the water and you've got a lot of blood in the water and stuff, like the shark's gonna show up.
Yeah, for
Um,
sure.
and it's kind of on you because you're not being careful. If you're in the water gutting a fish or something,
Yeah.
the shark's gonna show up and like, um, do you need to get rid of the shark? Yes. Would most people probably excuse you for trying to kill the shark? Yes. Um, you know, uh, should you be in fear for your safety? Yes, but like at the same time, the shark isn't evil. Like the shark's just there because that's the role that it fulfills in this
Yeah.
ecosystem. You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah, and most of the time they weren't out to kill or to physically harm
Mhm.
a human being unless they had a personal issue with a specific human person. And so I did run into a few cases of that. And they would just say, this person, this human being is so rude, is so arrogant, and keeps blaming me for stuff that I'm not doing. And I'm sick of it. So now I will become that. And so a lot of the counseling work that I did with these people, these human beings, was just to say, please stop trying to attribute things, bad or good or otherwise, to these non-human people because you don't understand the full picture.
Yeah, it's the abdication of personal responsibility, which again ties into that sort of recovery discussion that we had.
Yeah, excellent.
Yeah, I mean, it was that environment was kind of the most paranormal environment I've been in a long time. I mean, you can talk all day about, hot spots and haunted houses and stuff, but
Yeah.
and the number of folks that I talked to who were in recovery who had experiences, oftentimes associated with the depths of their addiction, was was pretty interesting. I think that it kind of represents a frontier for parapsychology to examine, with the right IRB protocols and whatnot in place to ensure people's anonymity and mental health. I think there's a lot of data that can be gathered from that community, both good and bad.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah.
I mean, people don't like to talk about this so much, but the 12-step program is it's a spiritualist influenced program. I mean, it was more or less. I wouldn't quite say that it was channeled, but it was definitely divinely. It seems to have it. If you read the literature, it seems to have been divinely channeled or channeled from somewhere else. Um, and that while there is an acknowledgement of higher powers and such, it seems to be a little bit more in line with the sort of um, dispensation of methodology that you'd find in religions more than it is some guy who just thought really hard about how how to organize the road to recovery. Yeah. And of course a lot of things are like that. I think chiropractic is like that as well. If you look into it, it was some of the origins are very sort of have this spiritualist leaning. And again, like I'm not saying it's a good thing or a bad thing. I'm just saying that
No.
these so many of our institutions and words and ways of thinking are influenced by the other world, and we just don't acknowledge it. You know,
I
um,
agree.
there are so many things that we just take for granted, and we don't really realize how, even if you don't believe in any of this stuff, you're still participating in a system that was built by it. You know,
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. Completely
um,
agree.
yeah, that's interesting. Um, Man, I bet you've got a lot of great stories like that.
I
So,
do.
so when these non-human people, and I do love
Yeah.
that terminology that you used because it puts me in the mindset of I recently heard a rising figure in the UFO community mention that ufologists should embrace animist concepts. Animism being the idea that everything has a soul, kind of a problematic term in and of itself, but setting aside those issues, I understand what he meant. But I didn't say this at the time, and I really should have said something about it. But like,
Oh,
but what I kind of wanted to say in that moment is like, okay, like I get where you're coming from with that. Oh, human beings have a soul, and my dog has a soul, and this elephant in Africa has a soul, and this kangaroo in Australia has a soul, and the trees have souls, and the plants have souls. But like, are you willing to take this to the place that it needs to go with a true worldview that is animist? that mountains are people and rivers are people and things that have
Did you
never.
get to watch my recent doll episode?
I have not, no.
I cover all of that
Okay.
in that
Okay.
episode, and I agree with much of what you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, or the idea that things that exist that have never had any sort of physical reality also, are ensouled. And the idea, I think what you're alluding to with the doll thing is like I remember, and I still feel this way sometimes too. Like when I see in an old, I used to feel this way often as a kid, and I still kind of feel this way now. When I see an old toy that hasn't been played with or that was made and never bought, like I get really sad. And
Oh,
it's almost like this idea that, this thing that was made for this express purpose no longer has that purpose and is no longer appreciated. And I know that's a silly thing to do when there's so much human suffering in the world, but I also get sad for things that have outlived their usefulness. Um,
uh,
Christmas tree lots are kind of sad to me too, honestly, but but yeah, but I think that that's something that not a lot of people in our contemporary society are comfortable with going, but that's the kind of the direction that you have to go. And I think that if you're pursuing this topic honestly, you kind of get pushed in that direction.
if I, gosh, I have so much to say on that. So ever since I was very, very young, toddler age, I've had memories of being outside of this incarnation, being outside of this body. And I remember being able to inhabit objects in order to peek in on the human world. And so I've always grown up with that organic belief. And I didn't know until this past year that that was really an actual belief. I just learned about the Shinto belief system and whatnot. And so it inspired me earlier this month to do, was it this month or the end of, it was either the end of November or just this month, to do an entire episode about that. It's a Christmas themed episode, but it's about dolls, possessed dolls, as well as animism and Shinto beliefs and gods and non-human people inhabiting physical objects. So the way that I see it, I do everything that I can to treat every object as respectfully and lovingly as I can,
Hmm.
because I fully believe that at any point in time, there could be someone in there, or that it could be a developing consciousness of its own, his or her or whatever's own. Um, so like a porcelain doll developing a spirit over the ages and whatnot. So that's kind of where I stand on it. I hope that makes sense.
No, it does, and I think it's a healthy place to be because even if you and I are absolutely crazy and we're just talking
Yeah,
nonsense, even if that's the case, I do think it makes you again become a more mindful person. It makes you
correct.
become less wasteful. Um, it makes you respect, like I have a real soft spot for heirlooms, even bad heirlooms. I have a real soft spot for them because I feel like there's this to mistreat an heirloom feels like you're mistreating more than an object. And
Mhm.
I know that a lot of people would view that as an unhealthy way to look at it, but to me, it represents so much more than that. It's something that has served a family lovingly for all these years, and then for you to be like, "Oh yeah, we're just gonna throw it out," it's like
Yeah.
it breaks my heart. Um, so yeah, I definitely do resonate with that. But again, it makes you. I wonder if we could embrace that idea as a culture if we would see a lot less waste. Um, in the
Yes.
in
Yes.
general. And I'm not saying that you have to reuse every Ziploc bag. Like, you know,
Yeah. Yeah. It's
I
not
think
that.
that I think that a red Solo cup probably has less personhood than
Correct.
an antique clock. I'm not saying that everything, but at the same time, like just a certain mindfulness that I think could be really beneficial. Yeah.
I agree. I completely agree. And it's so funny that you said an antique clock,
Mm.
because I come from an almost purely Irish and German family. And my grandma, um, God rest her soul, she was old school, like real old school German, came from Germany to America. And with her, she brought a few different clocks. And I remember I started having this memory as a toddler. I would see the specific cuckoo clock, antique cuckoo clock on the wall, and I remembered being a non-incarnate visiting and inhabiting that cuckoo clock. So you know where the little birdie comes out, right? I remember being right inside that door and then off to the side a little bit and waiting for the door to open so that no one would see me so that I could peek out into the room and see the world that I was really excited to come to.
Hmm.
So that's one of my extremely vivid experiences. And I remember as a little kid, I was highly confused because being in this body, I couldn't um ping myself up into that hiding spot anymore.
Hmm.
And that was one
Oh,
of like the harsher realities of inhabiting this body and realizing that things are a lot less magical and free than what they are elsewhere. Oh, good Lord, I sound so insane. I stand by it.
well, yeah, and I mean, I come from a relatively grounded background,
Mhm.
in terms of my family and whatnot. And I'm not even sure how much, like, would I be willing to stake my life on any of the things that I've said over the past half hour? Like, I don't really know if I would. But at the same time, it's all about that sort of, I embrace metaphor, and I guess I give more weight to metaphor and these compassionate modalities of thinking, than a lot of people, I suppose.
Of
Um,
course.
because I'll never forget, like, I was talking with my father about, this sort of thing we talked about at the beginning, the UFO
Yeah.
straddling the line between fiction and reality, and Middle Earth being a real place and Oz being a real place. And he's like, do you mean that literally? And I'm like, yes and no. I just sitting with that ambiguity. Especially, around this time of year. Is Santa
Yeah.
Claus real? Yes and no.
Right.
And it's all a matter of sort of adjusting your perspective, and just being comfortable, for me, again, having not experienced the same things that you've experienced. And I know a lot of other people are listening and probably in the same boat, like, this is kind of out there. Just sitting with this is a lovely idea, and being okay with not having to put a binary label of true or false onto it. Um, I think is just a more interesting way to live, quite frankly.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah. Being descriptive instead of prescriptive.
oh, that's a good way to put it. That's a
Yeah.
good way to put it. Yeah. Um, which is part of the reason that, I, well, I guess it depends on what day you catch me on, but I'm more sympathetic to pareidolia than I used to be, you know,
Yeah.
um, because you see a face in the grain of wood, or you see a face in the clouds, and it's like, okay, yes, on one level, like, yeah, that's obviously what it is. It's just like your your mind seeing a face where there isn't one, because there are certain patterns that we're programmed to recognize, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But to recognize that as a vector of non-human interaction, perhaps one of many inspirations for a non-human world, but also recognizing the fact that the non-human can interact through these natural
Hmm.
formations,
Hmm.
I think is really important. And to entertain, like, if you see a face in the grain of wood, to interact with that, to quietly. I mean, I don't want people going around talking to the walls or anything, but
Right.
but to quietly interact with that presence on the off chance that it might be something, is kind of an interesting little thought experiment that you can do as well. I was going to say something else and I forgot what it was, but it was very
Oh
much,
no.
oh yeah, it reminds me very much of, when people, you hear this a lot, like, um, their mother or grandmother or someone passes away and they see a butterfly and they're like, I know that was my grandmother or my mother. And like to the outside, being kind of cynical and not knowing the person who passed away and anything about their life, or like, it's just a butterfly. Come on, get with it.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I would entertain the idea that it can be both. You know what I mean?
I
That and it all depends on who's observing it and what they're bringing to it. So, yes, it is a butterfly. You could, drop it in a jar with uh cotton ball full of alcohol and put a pin in it on a, in a frame.
Please
And
don't
it's
do that.
and but and it's also it's also the person's grandmother, because it's sort of a messenger of a presence. It's a message deliverer for that person, um
Yeah.
but I think we love to sort of latch on to these, like, well, what is it, like, just the facts, give it to me this way, and I think that to be able to sit with those two possibilities as being equal, depending on one's perspective, I think is the key to unlocking a lot of the stuff. Same thing with dreams, like, dreams and synchronicities. Like, you hear these things, and they're always more interesting to the person telling them than they are to the to the person listening, unless they're really, really weird and profound and predictive and stuff like that. Generally speaking, the low level stuff is always that way, but it's always about who has had the experience is the most important thing, which is why I think that, focusing on the experiencer, of the experiencers of these phenomena, rather than measuring the burn marks from the UFO, or, collecting plaster casts of the big footprints. Like, I think focusing on the experiencer is the most important thing that the paranormal field can do moving forward.
I largely agree with that. Absolutely. And I think too about the it's interesting that you speak about the butterfly because my brand new show intro video is full of butterflies.
There you go. Yeah.
I
Well,
like that a lot.
it's a potent symbol for sure.
It is,
Yeah.
and then on top of that, I see the world through the lens of, well, three different types. I see incarnate, um, the home view, so like where we've all come from, you could say the heavenly view. And then I see the storyline view. And
Hmm.
I think that there is something magical and wonderful about living in a world where they converge and you have this experience of living symbolism in front of you with that butterfly, that specific butterfly. And then you can choose your own interpretation, aka choose your own adventure, to say, objectively, this is just a butterfly and it's just a coincidence, or you can assign more meaning to it. And that can change your entire outlook because what if it brings you comfort that then inspires you to something more?
Yes,
I hope that that makes sense.
it does. It does. Yeah, it does. Um,
And
yeah.
I must say, my friend, we are all out of time for our show today.
Well, it's been an
Uh,
absolute pleasure. Absolutely.
it has. And for anyone who is unfamiliar, Josh, would you please kindly let everyone know where they can find you and where they can find your work?
Yes, joshuacutchin.com, JOSHUACUTCHIN.com, is my website, and that I put links up there, for new interviews as they come up, and conference appearances, and new books as well. So if you're interested in keeping up to date on what I'm doing, that's the place to go.
Lovely. And my friends, until next time, I wish you a merry morning or a magic